And I was just going on. She says, man, Tom, it doesn't take much to get you excited. I said, no, it doesn't, but I've been looking for this sock. So you can guess, having started that way, we're going to be in Luke 15 today. So all y'all get your Bibles. We're going to be in Luke 15. We're not going to talk about all of Luke 15, but we are going to look at a verse or two in here. But I thought it might be good for us. Next week, I think we're going to be in 1 Corinthians 16. 1 Corinthians 16. No, we're not going to be in 1 Corinthians 8. I'm sorry. 1 Corinthians 8. But I know and I'm aware that all of you are very familiar with Luke 15. All of us know it. I mean, you got basically, we start off with the good old Pharisees there who are upset that Jesus is, hanging out with the wrong crowd, fraternizing with the wrong people. And then you get three stories. You get the parable of the sheep, and the parable of the lost coin, the parable of the prodigal son, and then you get that little addendum with the older brother. So that's kind of where we are. That's kind of the context. It's interesting as you look at the parables in that they're not all the same. You start off with a sheep, and then you go to a coin, and then you go to a human being. And you can imagine there's some significant differences in the stories because of that. The coin was lost, for example. It was something done to the coin. It was a passive participant in this. The coin, didn't lose itself. That coin was kind of like my keys. They get lost, and it's kind of like that sock. I lose socks and I lose keys. And occasionally I lose my wallet. And then my wife reminds me, she said, if you put your keys in the same place every day, you wouldn't lose them. And I'll just look at her like, thanks, dear, for that insight into how the world works. That's useful information when I'm looking for my keys. But the coin it's passive. It's not, losing itself. It's being lost. The sheep, it is alive, animate being, but it's active in its being lost, but it's not culpable. The sheep's just doing what sheep do. It's just chasing that green grass, chasing that next bite, and before it knows it, it's 3 miles out in the wilderness and lost. Really didn't have much to do with it. Not self-aware, not free. Free in the sense it can get lost, but not free in the sense that it really makes conscious decisions. So you can see as you go through there are some subtle differences. But the main gist of all three of them is about the happiness and the joy and the rejoicing when you find something that's lost. Kind of like that sock, the sheer excitement, happiness, and joy that which is lost is now found. And that's where we get to in this story as we look at it. Now, there is another point that could be made of what happens. There is a question that's asked. A question with regard to, it's an unstated question, but it's there. And that question is, are you in harmony? Are you in tune with how God feels? In other words, you have the obvious point of the parables. And the point is, do you rejoice? Are you as happy when you find something that is lost as God is? And that unstated question is, are you in tune with God? Are you in harmony with God? Do you feel about this stuff the way God feels about this stuff? Now, we're not talking about socks, and we're really not talking about coins, and we're really not talking about sheep. What we're talking about is people. And that's where the rub comes in. That's where the whole rub comes in. We can all get excited about an earring, maybe, that some lady misplaced and has found, or maybe a shoe or a sock or a coin or a CD that we wondered where it went to, or something else. But the issue is, can we get excited about people who are lost and become found? And that's a much more difficult thing. I want us to spend most of our time in verse 12. Because if I had my way, the parable of the prodigal son would be a whole lot longer than it is. I mean, it might be a whole gospel in and of itself. I'd like to see the extended version. And I just want to read verse 12. The younger one said to his father, "Father, give me my share of the estate." So he divided his property between them. Now I'm going to ask y'all, what's missing as you read that verse? Okay, any discussion of why? That's exact context. You know, the kid just didn't out of the blue just, I say kid, he's probably a young adult. He didn't just wake up one day and say, well, hey, I'm just going to go break my parents' hearts and ask for my inheritance that I really don't have any claim to until my father dies or is about to die, and I'm just going to cut my losses now, get it, and get out of here. Forget that stuff about taking care of my parents in their old age and honoring your father, and forget all that stuff. Context, man, I'd love to have some context, wouldn't you? Am I the only one that'd like to have some context? How about anything else? Anything else missing? What else is missing? There's got to be something else between what we're looking at there. Okay, the response. Elaborate on that. Okay. Okay. What can you imagine happens when he says to his father, divide my inheritance now? Okay, well that's one. And so what you're saying is there's some conversations taking place. We don't get any of those conversations. They're just not there. And I wish they were. I'm into family drama, I'm more into your family drama than I am my own family drama. I'll listen to your family drama. Some people, they get absorbed in their own drama. I want to get absorbed in your drama. So your drama doesn't cost me anything. You can tell me about it, and I can nod my head, and I can smile and do that eye contact thing, and occasionally, or I hate that, and act interested, and I am interested, but I'm interested, but yet, it's different. I'm not having to deal with it. I'm not having to live with it. So I would like to have the family drama of the prodigal son, because I think there's a whole lot of stories that could be asked. And I want to pose a question to you today. What do you do with people when they don't listen? What do you do with people that you love and that you care about when they won't listen? Now, you know what I'm talking about. I bet you've had a brother. I bet you've had a sister. I bet you've had a son or a daughter or a grandson or a granddaughter, and you love them. You care about them. And you know their life is heading for a train wreck. I mean, you can see it. It's clear. It's unavoidable if they don't change something. What do you do? To me, this is a great story to look at, to delve in to that type of question. What do you do when the people you care about and you love won't listen? Now, I might just ask, what are some of the things that we know are going to cause train wrecks in people's lives? What are some of the things that you've cried about, you've agonized about, you've worried about, you've prayed about, and you've tried to grab somebody by their lapels and shake them and say, won't you please reconsider? I mean, there's some easy ones. One just jumps right out at me. How about relationships? Have you ever had a brother or a sister, a friend, a son or a daughter, and you told them, you said, that person is not good for you, okay? Do not marry that person, okay? Do not get involved. Get out of that relationship. Have you ever had that happen? Have you ever seen that happen? Man, I've seen that happen. I've worked, and I know I've shared this with you, I worked with a lot over the years, a lot of young girls. And man, you learn a lot about life just observing young girls. And I'm talking 18 to, 25. And sometimes you can just sit there and look back and you think, man, she's headed for a train wreck with this person. She's about to really mess her life up. And you can't say anything. Well, you can say something, but it doesn't do any good. It just doesn't do any good. And you're sitting there and you're driving yourself crazy about it. You know that she's not going to listen because the people she's working with are telling her. Her mom and dad are telling her. Nobody can get through to her. And then the marriage lasts for about 6 months. It's tragic. So I would say that there are lots of things that we see in people that are going to cause them problems. Relationships. Another easy one would be substance abuse. We see somebody that's involved in substance abuse, and we know it's going to cause them heartache and misery and wreck their life, and you can't get through to them. Another one is how people handle money. How people handle money. Sometimes you just wish you could get through to your son or your daughter, your sister, your brother, your mom, your dad, maybe, and say, look, this isn't going well. But am I the only one that finds it difficult to give advice? Do you? Anybody else have that problem? I'm not talking about opinions. I'm talking this is clear. These are clear situations where, look, you're either going to change or you're setting yourself up for misery. Now, I made a list of some of the conversations we missed out on as they're trying to get these people, as they're trying to deal with the aftermath of the family of the prodigal son's announcement that he wants the inheritance divided up and left. And I'm not going to go through these exhaustively, but I just want to throw some of them out there for you to think about and ponder. I think the first conversation we miss out on, because the story is so abbreviated, is the conversation that the father has with the son. As soon as the son says that, you know the father is going to say something. First he's taken aback, I'm sure, but I have no doubt in my mind he is over there saying, are you sure you know what you're asking? Are you sure you know what you're doing? Do you really want to take off and leave? Those were different times. And we don't think anything about somebody taking off and leaving now. But those were different times where the family was more of a tight unit. And oftentimes, you can look at Jacob and his sons. The sons of Jacob, they were a tight-knit group. They all stayed together. I'm sure there was a certain distance, but they stayed together. They worked together. And I suspect his father had this idea that that's the way it was going to be with him and his two sons, but it didn't work out that way. So I think the first conversation that would take place would be with the father and the son. He says, look, do you know what you're asking? Do you have any idea what's going on here? The next one, and this lady's not even mentioned, but I believe in my heart there's a mother in this story somewhere. It's possible that she may have passed away during the child's birth or sometime in the child's childhood, but I suspect there's a mother somewhere in this story. And the father goes home and he says, honey, do you know what Junior asked? He wants me to divide the inheritance so he can take off. And I have a feeling there's going to be a conversation between the mother and the son real quick. And she's going to say something like, don't do this. Please don't do this. Well, it's set. This isn't taking place over a day or 2 days or an hour. This is probably something that's an ongoing process. And you'll see all kinds of conversations taking place, a whole web of them. And you'll see the fact that the father, he has a conversation with himself. He goes out there and he walks in the field and he thinks to himself, what did I do wrong? Where did I go wrong? One day he thinks to himself, I was too hard. The next day he thinks I wasn't hard enough. And he goes back and forth, back and forth. What did I do wrong? And then, of course, there's the conversation that the mother has with the father. And she says, honey, you didn't do anything wrong. This is not you. It's not your fault. I'm telling you, it's not your fault. You did not do this. And then after those conversations, you can guarantee the really intense conversations are when the older brother gets involved. Don't think he's going to take this sitting down. You're going to ask our Father. You're going to dishonor our Father. Ask Him to split up the inheritance so you can take off and do your own thing. The most intense conversation will be between the older brother and the younger brother. I guarantee it. It probably goes something like this. You are a no-count, worthless, narcissistic, selfish, self-centered individual that can't think about anybody but yourself. That's the starting line right there from the older brother to the younger brother. And the younger brother says something like, you are an overbearing know-it-all that I can't stand to see, to look at. You're the reason I'm leaving. I'm tired of being in your shadow. I'm tired of doing what you tell me to do. I'm tired of you being the favorite. I'm ready to get out of this place and make my own path and get away from you. That's what the younger brother says. And then the older brother goes to the father and says, you're not going to do this, are you? You're not going to give him that money, are you? You're not going to divide up the operation that we've got going and compromise it by a third so he can take off on this wild goose chase. You know good and well, a fool and his money, they're quite soon parted. And I guarantee you, he says, your younger son, he won't have it for long. And of course, the father will just look at him because he's already beat down. He already feels horrible. He already feels he messed up. He was either too hard, not hard enough, or somewhere in the middle. And then the younger son, or the older son, I should say, the older brother, he goes to the mother and says, look, you got to reason with Dad. This is not going well. You can't let this happen. And on it goes. Does this sound like anything you maybe know in your own family? Maybe you got a brother or a sister or something like that. This sounds a lot like what happens in families. The kids often fight about the way certain kids are treated, And not only that, there comes a point to where the kids begin to feel like they know how to parent the other kids better than the parents themselves know how to parent those kids. Even though they're not kids anymore, they're all adults. Does that ring a bell? Ring true with anybody? Now see, that's why I think this story is way too short. It's way too short. It would be a lot better if we had all the family drama that mapped out. Now I realize that's just my opinion, but I would love to have seen what happened. Now, the question is, what do we do when we have this situation? Because we've had all these conversations, and the younger brother, guess what? He still wants to go. He still wants to leave. And what do we do? What do you do? You let him go. I think you let him go. Now, obviously, in today's time and age, we really don't have many options. You got to let him go, Back then, there may have been some options. I don't know what all the social customs were as far as what the options the father may have. But the fact of the matter is, man, if you got somebody that doesn't want to be there, they're just going to poison the whole environment for everyone. You got to let them go. I mean, if Kyrie Irving wants out of Cleveland, you just got to let him go. You can't hold on to him. You can't keep him. He's a basketball player, by the way, for those of you who do not watch the NBA or did not hear the national anthem sung on the NBA All-Star game. But you just got to let him go. And I think that's one of the things that I would say, the father in this story did really well. He let him go. I don't know how long he held on to him. I'm guessing this was a process that played out over months. Just because it all is stated in a verse doesn't mean that it played out in a second. I suspect this played out over months. But eventually, I suspect the father saw the writing on the wall, and he let him go. What else can you do? What else do you think the father did? I mean, we're trying to answer this question. What do you do when the people you love won't listen? Well, one of the things you do is you let them set their course. Why do you let them set their course? What's their life to live? I had somebody, I occasionally have a sister who tries to, ask me questions that I'd just soon not answer about some of my adult sons. And you know what I tell my sister? I say to my sister, you've got his phone number. Call him. You can ask him. Why are you asking me about stuff my adult sons do? Just call him. You got his cell phone number. I know you do. And if you don't, I'll give it to you. And you can just call him. But my point to my sister is, hey, it's his life to live. When I was 18, 19 years old, I was making my own decisions. And when you've got sons that are up in their upper 20s, it's his life to live. It was this guy's life to live. You let him go. You got to give him the dignity to either fail or to triumph. And what other options do you have? And that's the same thing when you're dealing with a friend at work or wherever, and the career path that they're on is a disaster. The relationship path they're on is a disaster. The fact they got all their credit cards maxed out and they're headed for financial disaster is a disaster. And everything else in their life with regard to their substance abuse is a disaster. Ultimately, it's their life to live. It's their decisions to make. It's their life to ruin. And there's not a whole lot you can do about it. I wish it wasn't that way. But that's kind of the neat thing about being human. You're given an opportunity, you're given a chance, and then you go on from there. Anybody got anything they want to share on that point? I actually posed the question not so much to give you the answers as I'd like to hear what you think with regard to what do you do when the people you love or care about won't listen. Go ahead, ma'am.
Our second son, of course, we didn't have a fortune to divide, but he decided he wanted to go out on his own from the influence of so-called friends. And so his daddy told him, he talked with him, and he said, if you're going to continue on this path, you're going to have to get your own place. You're going to have to move out. We love you, we want you to be here, but we're not going to support you in what you're doing. And so he did move out, but we all told him how much we loved him. We made sure that we saw him often. And then his older sister and his older brother were a party, and they would come home for weekends, and we would go look him up, bring him to the house, and we would all sit around and pray for him. And we told him that's what we were going to do. We're praying for you privately, but we're also going to bring you here, and we're going to pray for you, whether you like it or not. And he had enough respect for us that he sat there.
Mm-hmm.
And that continued on for pretty close to 5 years. And finally, it didn't seem to be doing much good. And so finally, we couldn't take it anymore. We were retired, we could move, so that's when we moved here. And we did that. I did that knowing that he would follow us because he did love us. And we did that, and he was dependent on family. He loved family.
Mm-hmm.
And he did follow.
So some of the things you did was you put some boundaries out. That's good. I hear you. You said, you know, we can't support you in this, you know, and you put some boundaries out there.
There were boundaries, and we stuck with them. Now, he didn't have money for food or anything because he wasted it.
Yeah.
So he had money, but he wasted it. So his daddy never did know this, so don't tell him when you get up there. But he would be so hungry that he would come to our house before he went to work, and I would fix breakfast for him
Yeah. Yeah.
and send him a sandwich for lunch.
But another thing, I mean, you were willing to let him suffer a little bit, as I hear. I mean, I realize you fixed him breakfast, but you were willing to let him suffer a little bit.
I think they have to suffer. If you're going to make those kind of decisions, they need to be responsible for what they do.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
he wasn't in his 20s. He was, well, he may have been 20, but he was not in his upper 20s. He was still pretty young, but back then, that wasn't exactly young.
Yeah. 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 I think that's good. I think that's good advice. You know, put some boundaries out, and you know,
Don't forget to pray. I have full faith that God had a big hand in this, because you know what he is now? He's a preacher,
yeah.
and he's very good, and he's been a preacher for more than 30 years.
The prodigal son came back.
He did.
Yeah.
He did.
So excellent. Excellent.
And he is so, and he counsels other boys and girls who did what he, who do what he did, or similar.
Gotcha. Gotcha. That's good stuff. I mean, one of the things I heard you saying is, and I see in this, and I think it's probably one of the reasons the father let his son go in this story and decided to just divide up and say, you go, is one of the things you do, you know, with immediate family is you just don't let it become totally toxic, you know, trying to hang on, and you put some boundaries out and saying, look, you're going down a path that may destroy you, but we're not going to let it destroy the whole family. You know, if you choose to go that route, that's your choice. But we're not all gonna, you know, go down that path and be destroyed, you know, because of your choice. We got some free will in this too. You know, we got some decisions that we need to make. We've got a life that we have to live, and just because you choose to be eaten up with this, we don't have to share in that affliction. Anyone else? Any other wisdom from some of you who've gone through this, or just maybe just some insight into what you've observed with others? Like I said, it's a whole lot more easy to talk about this stuff when it's somebody else's family drama you're talking about, like in this story, than when you're experiencing it firsthand and right now and in the immediate time frame. One of the other things I liked what was said was she stayed connected. It wasn't that she was connected in like she was tied with a rope, you know, like my wrist to your wrist, but she stayed tethered loosely. In other words, there was distance and boundary, but yet there was a connection. You didn't lose the connection. Well, you can if you're the father in this story, because he goes off to a foreign place somewhere, and you don't have a telephone, a cell phone, or a bus, or a train, or a car, and you don't even know whether he's alive or dead. Go ahead.
Father was looking for him.
He was. His heart was always connected with him, even if he was not always connected in a physical sense. And I think it's very important you stay connected in some sense to where things can go right and they can improve. I remember something a guy said once who had been in prison, and he'd gotten out and he was working with people that were struggling with substance abuse, and then he fell off the wheels again and went back to prison. But I remember something he said that's always stuck with me. when he was talking about working with people who are struggling with substance abuse. He says you got to learn to love them in their ungodliness. Now, he wasn't saying you got to learn to love their ungodliness. He says you got to learn to love them while they're in their ungodliness, and you got to learn to care for them and try and love them and try and be there. You know, not get destroyed by them, but love them. And let me tell you, that is harder to do than you think. It's really hard to do when it's someone in your family. That's when it's hardest to do. You know, it's one thing to love somebody you don't really even know, who's struggling with something, and you try and help them and pick them up because you're not emotionally invested in them. But let's say you're this older brother. It's really easy to sit up on our sanctimonious, self-righteous perches and look at this older brother and say, you're just a horrible, disgusting, despicable individual because you have no forgiveness, grace, or compassion within your heart. But it's not just that simple. You know, this guy may not have been that bad a guy. As a matter of fact, he might have been a real good neighbor. You know, and part of the problem is when you've got somebody in your family, a brother or sister especially, who you perceive to be treating your mother or your father poorly, it's extremely difficult to feel love towards them. You know, because, you know, all relationships aren't equal. And I'll just be honest with you. You know, I felt more of an emotional connection with my parents than I do any of my brothers or sisters. Now, I love my brothers and sisters. But, man, I remember coming home after Pat and I used to, we'd go home. Pat would go home to her parents, and she'd cry all the way she left because, you know, she's like, why did I leave my mom and dad and marry this bum? And then I'd go home, and I would cry on all the way home because I would sit there and see some of the domestic wreckage that existed in the home I grew up in, because of the just bad, toxic relationship between my younger brother and my mother and father. And when you observe that, you see somebody hurt, somebody you're very close to, it's hard to be real compassionate about them. And not only that, when you've gone down those paths of betrayal over and over and over again, as I suspect this younger brother did. See, this younger brother, I have a feeling, he's sitting here thinking, why are we having this celebration? He's thinking to himself, you know, I want to see some evidence of this, this repentance, you know. This looks too much to me like a little, what they call jailhouse religion. You know, have you ever heard of jailhouse religion, where you just, you know, you get it while you're there and then you get out and it's all over? It's kind of like a doctor deals with all the time. You know, he takes somebody who's had a heart attack, he cuts them open, he does that bypass, or he puts that stent in, and then, you know, they're all excited for about 3 months, and they watch their diet, and they lose about 50 pounds, and they're out there exercising, and then they come back in a year, and they've put on 60 pounds, they're back to smoking, and it looks like jailhouse religion. He wanted to see some proof. He wanted to see some evidence. Well, I don't know if we figured out, what do you tell people who you love when they won't listen? What do you do when you tell somebody you love who won't listen? But I do appreciate the things that were said, and I think it's something that we got to struggle with. And I think always we have to struggle with what the point of these parables are. And the point of, especially the last one, you know, not only do we feel the excitement and the joy and the happiness when we find something that was lost, find a human being that was lost that is now saved, but is our heart in tune and in harmony with God? Are we looking out for those people? Are we caring for those people? And are we longing for them to come back? And, you know, you've got the view. I mean, the story is interestingly framed. It starts off with the Pharisees, and it ends with the older brother. Two people, two groups that claim to be doing things right, claim to be doing what their father wanted, but yet their heart just wasn't quite in harmony with their father's. So, to put a frame on mine, there are bigger issues than me finding a sock. There are souls out there. There are people we love to be looked for, to be longed for, and to be welcomed back when they repent. And on that, we'll close.